Hello everyone, welcome back to Judgment and Decision Making. I'm Dr. Padilla. Now we're going to talk about the tragedy of the commons and us versus them. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the tragedy of the commons. It's a basic concept that in a scenario where shepherds bring their flocks to a common field, there might be so many sheep that it's dangerous and they might destroy the commons unless people decrease the size of their herds. And the tragedy is that if it's truly commons, there is no incentive to cooperate with anyone else. Either you are a fool if no one else cooperates with you and you decrease the size of your herd, or if everyone's cooperating, you could potentially be a free rider and you miss your opportunity to do so. There's all of these moral issues associated with the tragedy of the commons that we experience every day, particularly with global warming. We have a global commons now, and unfortunately, it is hard to think about it in that scale, that we're all contributing to the global good, but it's important to consider it in that context. When framed in the context of morality, the tragedy of the commons requires getting people to not be selfish. It is an issue of me versus us. We need to find ways to help everyone work collectively. And again, on a global scale, that's very, very difficult. Which frames this problem nicely. Imagine that there's two different groups that are interacting with a tragedy of the commons scenario. Let's say one group treats the pasture as a classic commons, but another group thinks something very different, believes that the pasture should be divided up into parcels of land and you should take care of those individual parcels of land. The things that fuel a dangerous situation is that each group has a reason structure to why their way is correct. And it could be have a moral weight associated with it, where they think that their way is the right way. And I think that we're seeing that in terms of how people are dealing with global warming, where certain groups of people think that their response is the morally right response, and other people think something very different. So there's no agreement about how to enact responsible stewardship of the commons. There's multiple different perspectives. Most intergroup conflicts on our planet ultimately are cultural disagreements about whose right is righter. And, I think it is easy to fall into this ourselves. One that was brought up for me recently is when I watched Tiger King. There's all of these people that were seemingly acting crazy. I couldn't believe how many of these individuals took the actions that they did. They seemed morally wrong, and I felt deep in my bones that it's wrong to breed tigers, to allow people to pet cubs, and then to not take care of the adult tigers. There's more tigers in captivity in the US than in the wild around the entire planet. And there was examples of tigers just giving birth and their cubs being taken away from them. Other tigers were put into suitcases to be taken up to hotel rooms so people could play with the baby cubs. All of these things felt morally wrong to me. But if you take a step back and realize that if you didn't win the lottery of being born where you were, maybe you were born in some other location, some of the things that we do today might seem morally egregious. For example, we usually house elderly people in different homes. So we kind of group them all together and pay people to take care of our grandparents. And I know a lot of different cultures would think that was insane, that these people that have lots of dignity and value to the community are kind of put away, out of sight, out of mind. I think they would find that morally egregious. So that's to say, when doing moral decision making and there's an us versus them scenario, keep your intuitions as far away as possible. Intuitions about what is right, what is the moral thing to do can be really problematic. Try to take their perspective, try to think what they think, try to feel what they feel, take a deep breath, and then do it again. You always have to work very hard to imagine what someone else's perspective might be like, particularly if you feel like what they're doing is morally egregious. There's a variety of interesting examples from the book that show scenarios of deception and how that plays out in these experimental contexts. So humans have a massive capacity for deception. There's one interesting study where subjects would roll a dice with different results, yielding different monetary rewards. And the rolls were made in private, so the subjects could report the outcome, and there was an opportunity to cheat there. So they could report an outcome that was not what they actually rolled with the dice. Now, if there was no cheating, you would expect that each of the numbers of a dice would come up 1/6 of the time. And subjects were over 2,000 college students in 23 countries, in 23 countries. And what they found is that in countries where there was higher rates of corruption, tax evasion, fraud, that's also where you saw the higher instances of lying, which suggests that your perspective towards lying is also influenced by how much cheating happens in your culture. Now, the line showed a really interesting pattern where it wasn't as if people would always select a very high dice roll. You could imagine that if you're going to lie, you might as well say, you always rolled a 6. But instead, what people did was they would take their second roll. They would roll 2 times and only report their second roll if it was higher. And they would think something like, darn, my first roll was a 1, that was about outcome. My second roll is 4, better. If rolls are actually random, I could have actually rolled a 4 instead of a 1. So let's just say 4, and that's not really cheating. It's this way of justifying this cheating activity. Okay, here's an interesting point I'd like to bring up. And this isn't foolproof, of course, but I think it was an interesting title for the slide, How to Tell if Someone's Lying. In one study, what they did is they had it set up where people could cheat or not. And they actually found that 1/3 of people in their study were cheating and about 1/6 were on kind of the borderline of cheating. And the individuals that were cheating activated particular areas of the brain that we can predict, that we've seen come up again and again. One is sort of this control area of the brain. Another one is with conflict detection. And so the two things I'll point out is that there was a slower response pattern when those 2 areas were activated and people were lying because they had to work hard to lie. Those areas are associated with cognitive control and trying hard to do something. So they had to hold in their mind their lie, remember the scenario of the lie, and all of that process is very hard. And so one of the key indicators that they were lying is that it took them longer. They had longer response times during their lying activity. So if you wanted to try to tell if someone's lying, that was one fairly stable indicator, is this time taken was longer for individuals who are lying. Okay, how about people who always tell the truth? There is a large group of people who just always consistently tell the truth. How do you become one of those truth tellers? Well, don't use any of those brain regions associated with working hard at a task. Essentially, you need to automate doing the right thing. You need to make telling the truth easy. So you don't want to actively try, you want to automate. So every time, tell the truth over and over and over again. And so it is absolutely easy for you to do. And this is one of the reasons why individuals will jump into action. And after, like someone who runs into a burning building to save a child, and they'll say, I didn't even think about it, I just did it. Because they have automated doing those things, doing the right thing. And here's a clip of one of my favorite examples of that.
A 4-year-old boy is alive today thanks to a very strong and courageous man who has earned the nickname Spider-Man. Look at this video from Paris, France. The boy was hanging from a 5th-floor balcony when Mamadou Gassama sprang into action. The 22-year-old quickly climbed up the balconies and pulled the child to safety. Gassama is from Mali. He has been living in France illegally. President Emmanuel Macron met with him today and urged him to put in his request for nationalization papers, promising he would be naturalized into the country. The president also said the Paris Fire Department was ready to offer him a job. Authorities don't think the boy's parents were home at this time.
Really amazing story. And I think that's just a great example of how no matter what scenario you're in, if you just constantly practice doing the right thing, it'll be easier for you to take that action when it's time. Summary here, most intergroup conflicts on our planet ultimately are cultural disagreements about whose right is righter. When you're in an us versus them scenario, try to take their perspective. Try to think what they think, try to feel what they feel, take a deep breath, and do it again. It will be hard, but give it a shot. It's absolutely worth working towards. And automate doing the right thing to make it easier. It's hard to always be using type 2 processing to constantly do something, but if you do it over and over and over again, at some point it will be automated and turn into type 1. Then you won't have to think about it and you can easily do the right thing every time.